Hey there, Shadowers, how's everybody doing today? Welcome to my very first top 10, my top 10 favorite Pokemon of all time. I hope you're all excited for this. Let's just jump right into it. Number 10, Victini. Oh sure, of course a legendary would be on the list. What are you, 5? No, just hear me out. Victini was my first ever event Pokemon, and one of the coolest ones to ever exist. Back when the event started, it was said that a mythical Pokemon was hidden on a small island off Castelia City. This island was known as Liberty Garden, home to a big, beautiful lighthouse. Players could obtain a ticket known as the Liberty Pass via mystery gift that granted them access to the small island, allowing them to search for this Pokemon. Unfortunately, the player wasn't the only one looking for Victini. Pokemon Black and White's evil team, Team Plasma, was looking to capture Victini in order to protect it from selfish people. In an effort to stop yet another person from hurting this poor Pokemon, they all battle the player. After having defeated all of the Plasma Grunts, the player is finally able to see Victini. Honestly, this is the most in-depth event I've ever participated in. Black and White were some of the best Pokemon games to date, and this just added a whole new layer to the story. Upon reaching Castelia, the player never really experiences Team Plasma in action. If they obtained the Liberty Pass, however, the player was able to experience just how serious Team Plasma was about protecting Pokemon, even if their logic was flawed. The way Victini added depth to how Team Plasma operates, including the fact that it was the first event I ever participated in, is what secures this little guy at number 10 on this list. Number 9, Luxray. Pokemon Diamond was the first Pokemon game I knew about prior to its launch. A few years after finishing Pokemon Sapphire, I wanted more. I wanted to experience the thrill of going on a journey with my Pokemon once again. That's why, when they announced Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, I knew I absolutely had to buy it. After a fateful battle with an aggressive Starly, I had received my first Pokemon in Sinnoh, Turtwig. We set off on our journey together, excited to see what the world would throw at us. Having just finished talking with Dawn about how to capture a Pokemon, we headed for Jubilife City. That's when I encountered the most adorable Pokemon I had ever seen, a Shinx! I absolutely had to capture it. I lowered its health, looked for an opening, and threw my Pokeball. The Pokeball wobbled once, then twice, then 3 times. I had caught it. I had caught my first Pokemon in the Sinnoh region, a Shinx. This Pokemon and I experienced so much together. Shinx was a huge part of my journey. Throughout it, he evolved. First he evolved into a Luxio. Luxio was adorable. While Turtwig hadn't evolved yet, Shinx had. This Pokemon was strong. Even if it was adorable, it could kick some serious butt, but I wasn't prepared for its next evolution, Luxray. After countless battles, Luxio had finally reached the level required for it to evolve. It was the only Pokemon in my party that was about to reach its final evolution. I watched as it was enveloped with a bright light. After a moment, the bright light burst. A shadowy Pokemon had appeared before me. It was Luxray. My cute little Luxio had finally evolved into a Luxray, an electric lion. Luxray was a force to be reckoned with. I felt as though everyone in Sinnoh knew that as soon as Luxray was on the battlefield, it was all over for them. The immense power of Luxray, including that it was my first fully evolved Pokemon in Sinnoh, is why he's sitting at number 9. Number 8, Grovyle. I'm sure you know where this is going. Here, let me give you a hint. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Time and Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Darkness. Released in 2008, they still stand as one of the greatest Pokemon spin-off games of all time. One summer break, I had gone to my grandmother's to stay. This was a regular thing as there was no one to look after me at home. I had a friend where my grandmother lived, and we would always hang out. For privacy purposes, let's call him Blank. After a day of hanging out with Blank, we rode our bikes back to his house. I can't remember what happened exactly, but it all led up to him letting me borrow a few games. One of those games being Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of, was it Time or was it Darkness? This is why I mentioned both of them at the beginning of this. I just can't remember. Something tells me it was Time, but then another something tells me it was Darkness. Perhaps I played both? Who knows? Anyway, fast forward a few nights. I had been playing it since I got it. It was the best game I had ever played. The story was perfect, the characters were perfect, everything was perfect. I just couldn't put it down. I don't want to spoil the story, so I'll just say the obvious. According to the legendary explorer Dusknoir, Grovyle was trying to steal a bunch of things called time gears. This was a huge problem according to Dusknoir, so he asked for the guild's aid in bringing this Pokemon to justice. I can't exactly remember the reason stealing the time gears was bad, but without spoiling the story too much, I'll just say, the way it plays out is the reason I love Grovyle to this day. That's why he's at number 8. Number 7. Stoutland. During my Pokemon journey in the Unova region, this Pokemon was the real MVP. He could tank hits, attack hard, and had a fantastic stash to boot. There's really not all that much to say about this Pokemon, except that fighting Team Plasma was all the more easy with this guy on my side. Number 6. Spewpa. Pokemon X and Y brought a lot of new Pokemon to the table. We have Froakie, Helioptile, Hawlucha, Keyring, Blooper, Flying Duck, and who could forget the absolute nightmare of a Pokemon, Esper? Even among all of the bad Pokemon, there are some pretty awesome ones too. One of those being Spewpa. Aside from being super cute, there's another reason why I like this Pokemon. When it defends itself, it shoots confetti everywhere. It's like a party. Okay, so the confetti is actually powder, but who cares? When I'm invited to a party, there's no doubt I'll be bringing this little guy as my +1. Number 5. Crustle and Darmanitan. The Battle Subway. A perfect place for any trainer to test their strength. Each train provides a different experience. Single battles, double battles, you can even play with your friends. Remember Blank, the friend I was talking about a moment ago? After we had both finished our journeys in the Unova region, we decided we could finally take on the Battle Subway. At the end of the Battle Subway, the player would be able to take on the Subway bosses, Ingo and Emmett. Blank and I both decided that getting to the Subway bosses was our goal. We boarded the multi-train and sent out our Pokemon. Since it was a 2-on-2 double battle, Blank and I could only choose 2 Pokemon each. The Pokemon I chose were Crustle and Darmanitan. Unfortunately, I can't quite remember what Pokemon Blank chose. Every time we entered the Battle Subway, we annihilated any Pokemon that stood in our way. That was until we were faced with the utterly terrifying Pokemon known as Frillish. Sure, this thing may look cute, but what we experienced that day marked the beginning of a new journey for Blank and I. We were to rid the subway of this evil Pokemon, but how? It never occurred to us that it was part ghost type. We always thought it was pure water, and could never understand why our moves weren't strong against it. Blank and I didn't have any grass or electric type Pokemon on our side either, so that meant it was going to be even more difficult to defeat it. Eventually, the Frillish took out both mine and Blank's Pokemon. We both agreed that we wouldn't stop until we reached the subway bosses, meaning we'd have to take out Frillish as fast as we could before it could take out any of our Pokemon. The problem was, every time we reached Frillish, our Pokemon were already weak from battling against other Pokemon. We had no chance whatsoever. Eventually, it was time for Blank to go home. The whole day just flew by. We were so intent on getting past that Frillish that we lost track of time. Before he left, we decided we would train our Pokemon at home until they got stronger. The next day, he came over again, with his Pokemon all trained up and ready to go. My Pokemon had learned a few new moves, most notably being Crustle's Shell Smash. This was a move that sacrificed defense for attack, and it proved to be an invaluable asset in the Battle Subway. Darmanitan and Crustle weren't exactly the best Pokemon to take on a Frillish, but I had made it my mission to take Frillish out with the Pokemon I fought it with in the first place. Anyway, it went just as well as you would expect. Horribly. Once again, we had lost to a Frillish in the Battle Subway. Was this impossible? Could we just not do it? Half of our day was lost trying to take on this Frillish. It became clear that it was impossible. There was no way to win. Then, by some stroke of luck, we defeated it. I remember it clearly. We didn't even realize it had happened. There we were, laying on separate couches on either side of the living room, completely sapped of any hope. I don't even think I was looking at the screen. Once I reached Frillish, I knew there was no point in even trying. We were just going to get beaten anyway. When we realized what had happened, our faces lit up with the kind of joy you can't experience just by laughing with your friends or watching something funny. I remember us both cheering so loud that my grandma came running up the stairs to make sure no one was getting hurt. We earned that victory. A day and a half of trying to take out that Frillish was more than enough work for that accomplishment. Granted, once we reached the end of the subway, the bosses didn't even show up. We decided to take a break and come back to it another time, which we never did. Despite not encountering the subway bosses, Darmanitan and Crustle still stuck it out until the very end with me all those times Blank and I lost, and that's why they are at number 5. Number 4. Dusknoir. Back to Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Time and Explorers of Darkness. The legendary explorer known as Dusknoir is by far my favorite Pokemon in the Mystery Dungeon series to date. Once again, I can't exactly say without spoiling the story, but those that have played this game will definitely understand why I love this Pokemon so much. Truly an interesting Pokemon. His role in this adventure is what made this game what it is. Without him, these games just wouldn't be as great and memorable as they are. Number 3. Palkia. You're never going to guess the reason I love this Pokemon. That's right, except we're not talking about Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Time or Explorers of Darkness, we're talking about Explorers of Sky. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky was a game released in 2009. It was exactly the same as Explorers of Time and Explorers of Darkness, except with a few differences. I'm not exactly sure if this happens in Explorers of Time and Explorers of Darkness, but there's an event in the epilogue of Explorers of Sky which really makes Palkia a truly memorable Pokemon for me. At some point in the epilogue, you and your partner ask Lapras if it knows anything of the distortion of space. Unfortunately, Lapras knows nothing on the subject, however, it knows of a being that embodies space itself, this being Palkia. Palkia is said to possess the ability to distort space itself, its domain being the spatial rift. Your partner decides it is in your best interest to go and speak with Palkia, and asks Lapras if you are able to ride on its back to the spatial rift. Lapras unfortunately is unable to travel there, saying it doesn't even know where it is. You and your partner are led to believe that there is no possible way to travel to the spatial rift, and decide to do a little more research. You and your partner head back to your home on Sharpedo Bluff after agreeing to investigate some more the next day. What follows is a scene in which you and your partner are laying in bed, peacefully sleeping. Suddenly, a small but violent earthquake occurs, followed shortly after by a bright light. Then, Palkia appeared, its feet crashing against the ground. As a kid, there was nothing more terrifying than a giant beast appearing like this, disrupting such a seemingly peaceful moment. It gave me the biggest scare as a kid, but this moment stuck with me. Whenever I think of Palkia, I think of the giant beast that forcefully dragged me into the spatial rift. An intense moment such as this one is one that I will never forget. What makes this moment even more awesome is what follows soon after, but I'm not gonna spoil that for you either. Number 2. Munchlax. There was a time where Munchlax was my number 1 favorite Pokemon of all time. I loved it to death. It was the greatest Pokemon ever to me when I was a kid. It was actually the reason for one of my fondest memories. Like I said, whenever there was a vacation from school, I would go to my grandmother's. My grandma was very fond of a city called Auckland and would often go there. Sometimes I would be lucky enough that she was going during my vacation time, so I could go with her. Auckland is a huge city, much like Tokyo, but slightly smaller and with less people. It's my favorite place in New Zealand, and I'm looking forward to going there again sometime. Anyway, there was a point where we needed to go to a big office building. I can't exactly remember why though. After we had finished doing whatever we had to do, I decided to take the bus to the arcade all the way on the other side of Queen Street, while they did whatever they had to do next. I had my DSi with me. At the time, it was covered in Pokemon stickers. While I waited for the bus, I sat on top of this big concrete cube with some sort of grassy plant in it. All of a sudden, a kid around the same age as me approached me. He said, "Hey, do you want to trade with me? I noticed the Pokemon stickers on your DS." This was the first time a stranger had approached me like this. I said, "Sure." I was playing Pokemon Platinum at the time and had quite a few Pokemon to hand out. He said he had loads of Pokemon and asked what Pokemon I'd like. Since it was my favorite Pokemon at the time, I asked if he had a Munchlax, and he said he was sure he had one somewhere. He searched for it while I readied my Pokemon for trade. By the time he had found it, his bus had come. I remember his mom saying, "Quick, get on before it leaves." As it was trading, he boarded the bus and looked at me through the window with a face that said, "It's happening." We were really hoping that it would trade before the bus left. As the trade completed, the bus pulled away. The kid looked at me through the window of the bus with a huge smile on his face, jumping up and down in his seat. The screen faded out and it said, "Connecting with player." Uh-oh, that won't be happening. He's long gone. Connection lost. I didn't get Munchlax. I can only imagine how disappointed he was when he realized he didn't get the Pokemon I gave him. But you know what? That little exchange, the enjoyment I had talking to him, trading with him, it was great. I always think about that kid and how he must have felt. I should feel sad about it, but all I can remember is the huge smile on his face as his bus pulled away. I wonder if he ever thinks back to that time like I do. This is one of my fondest memories. Number 1. Woobat. This is it, the first ever #1 place on my first ever top 10. What could possibly be the reason for Woobat being my favorite Pokemon? Well, it's super cute and I really like it.
You know what? I'm not surprised.
That's all there is to it. I hope you guys all enjoyed. That's going to do it for my top 10 favorite Pokemon list. Why don't you all tell me what your favorite Pokemon are in the shadow section below? I wonder if we share the same favorite Pokemon. If you do want to see more top 10s, comment down below. I'd love to know what kind of top 10 you'd like to see next. I hope you all enjoyed. I know it's not like the usual stuff I do on my channel, but thank you so much for watching it anyway. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all later. Peace out.